Zixthala pressed her crystalline fingers against the observation deck window and watched the small human shuttle dock with Haven's Rest Station. The metal ship looked crude compared to the flowing biovessels of her own people, or the elegant energy constructs of the Kurtani. But there was something about its simple design that spoke of purpose over beauty. The humans had been in space for only 50 years, making them the youngest species in the Galactic Council records. The ethereal confluence had sent Zixthala to study these newcomers as part of the standard integration protocol. Every species that joined the galactic community needed assessment, documentation, and guidance. The humans seemed eager to learn and surprisingly adaptable for such a primitive race. Captain Jake Morrison stepped through the airlock first, his brown hair slightly messy from the helmet he had just removed. He smiled at the greeting committee of various alien species, showing those strange white teeth that humans used for both eating and emotional expression. Behind him came Dr. Lisa Campbell, a woman with blonde hair tied back in what humans called a ponytail. She carried several data tablets and kept looking around with obvious excitement. The third human was Ryan Torres, the ship's engineer, a stocky man with dark skin and clever eyes that seemed to catalog every piece of technology he saw. The last to enter was Amy Johnson, their communications officer, a tall woman with red hair who immediately began making friendly gestures to each alien. Species present, Zixthala introduced herself using the harmonic tones her people used for formal greetings. Captain Morrison listened carefully, then attempted to repeat the sound pattern. His vocal cords could not produce the crystal-clear notes, but his effort was genuine and somehow touching. "Thank you for welcoming us to Haven's Rest," Morrison said in standard galactic common language, though his accent was thick with human inflection. "We're honored to be here and excited to learn from all of you." Dr. Campbell stepped forward with her data tablets, clutched against her chest like protective armor. "I've read every available report about the species stationed here," she said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. "I have so many questions about your biology, your cultures, your histories. I hope we can exchange knowledge freely." The other aliens on the station seemed charmed by the humans' obvious excitement. The peaceful Zephyrians, with their flowing, tentacle-like appendages, swayed in what Zixthala recognized as their gesture of welcome. The logical Kurtani, beings of pure thought housed in mechanical shells, clicked their approval through their translation devices. Even the artistic Melodites, usually shy around new species, hummed a welcoming song. Over the following weeks, Zixthala observed the humans as they settled into life on the research station. They adapted quickly to the artificial gravity and recycled atmosphere. More impressive was how they adapted to the social dynamics of a multi-species community. Captain Morrison made it a point to learn basic greetings in every language spoken on the station. He would spend hours with the Melodites, listening to their complex musical communications and trying to understand their artistic expressions. When the Kurtani complained about inefficiencies in the station's logistics, Morrison organized work groups that included members from different species, somehow making the cooperation feel natural rather than forced. Dr. Campbell threw herself into her research with infectious enthusiasm. She convinced members of every species to provide biological samples and cultural information. But unlike the cold, clinical approach most researchers took, Campbell made her subjects feel like partners in discovery rather than test subjects. She would share human foods with the Zephyrians and teach them human games while learning about their regenerative abilities. Ryan Torres found ways to improve nearly every system on the station within his first month. But he never made these improvements without consulting the beings who would use them. He would sit with the maintenance crews from various species, sketching designs and asking for input. His modifications always seemed to anticipate needs that others hadn't even realized they had. Amy Johnson became the unofficial social coordinator of Haven's Rest, She organized interspecies cultural exchange events, translation workshops, and what humans called movie nights, where different species would share their entertainment media. Her ability to find common ground between vastly different cultures was remarkable. Zixthala found herself drawn to these movie nights more than she expected. The humans shared stories that revealed much about their nature. They told tales of exploration and discovery, of friendship between different peoples, of individuals who sacrificed themselves for the greater good. But they also shared darker stories, tales of war and conflict that made some of the more peaceful species uncomfortable. "Why do you create entertainment about violence?" asked Veltar, one of the Zephyrians, during a particularly intense human film about something called World War II. Captain Morrison paused the projection and considered the question carefully. "Because those stories are part of who we are," he said. "We've had to fight for survival, to protect what we care about. These stories remind us of the cost of conflict and the value of peace." The answer seemed to satisfy most of the aliens present, but Zixthala noticed something in Morrison's tone, a depth that suggested experience rather than just academic knowledge. She made a note in her observation log to investigate human military history more thoroughly. The humans had other habits that seemed odd but harmless. They named everything. Their shuttle was called Pioneer's Dream. Their equipment had individual designations, and they even gave nicknames to areas of the station. Ryan Torres called the main engineering section the Heart, while Amy Johnson referred to the communications array as the Voice. They also formed emotional attachments to inanimate objects with surprising speed. Dr. Campbell became genuinely distressed when her favorite data tablet malfunctioned, treating its repair with the same care she would show to an injured friend. Captain Morrison kept a small plant in his quarters that he tended with obvious affection, talking to it during his daily routine. Perhaps most endearing was their protective instinct towards smaller or weaker beings. When a young Melodite became separated from its family group during a supply run, the entire human crew dropped their duties to help search. They found the little creature hiding in a maintenance shaft, frightened and singing distress songs. Amy Johnson spent hours sitting with it, humming human lullabies until the child calmed down enough to be reunited with its family. The Melodite elders were so grateful that they composed a special song about human kindness, which they performed. At the next cultural exchange event, Zixthala watched Captain Morrison's face during the performance and saw genuine emotion there, a softness that seemed to define the human response to gratitude and acceptance. In her regular reports to the ethereal confluence, Zixthala described the humans as enthusiastically harmless and emotionally driven, but manageable. They seemed to be exactly what they appeared, a young species eager to learn and contribute to the galactic community. Their technology was primitive, but showed promise. Their social structure was complex but stable, and their intentions appeared genuinely peaceful. The only concerning element in her reports was their obvious military background. All 4 humans showed signs of formal combat training, though they claimed to be researchers and explorers. When questioned about this, Captain Morrison explained that space travel was dangerous and required personnel who could handle emergencies. This seemed reasonable, and Zixthala noted it without concern. As the weeks passed, Haven's Rest became more efficient and more pleasant with the human presence. Other species began to adopt some human customs, like the naming of objects and the informal social gatherings. The humans, in turn, learned alien techniques for meditation, advanced mathematics, and artistic expression. Everything seemed perfect in their little multi-species community. Zixthala began to draft her final integration report, recommending that humans be granted full membership in the Galactic Council. They had proven themselves to be valuable contributors to interspecies cooperation and understanding. Then the long-range sensors detected something approaching from the edge of the system. Something that would change everything Zix Thala thought. She knew about the friendly, harmless humans who had become such welcome additions to Haven's Rest. The alarm that echoed through Haven's Rest was unlike anything Zix Thala had heard before. It was not the gentle chime that announced meal times, or the soft pulse that indicated incoming communications. This was urgent, piercing, and filled with a kind of electronic panic that made her crystalline form vibrate with sympathetic resonance. Station Commander Kefmal, a elderly Kartani whose mechanical shell had been polished to a mirror, shined by decades of service, appeared on every screen throughout the facility. His translated voice carried a tremor that Zix Thala had never heard from the usually calm species. All residents of Haven's Rest, we have detected an approaching fleet at the edge of our system, the commander announced. Long-range analysis confirms these vessels belong to the Vex High Swarm. Estimated arrival time is 6 hours. All non-essential personnel should prepare for immediate evacuation. The reaction throughout the station was immediate and chaotic. The Zephyrians began their panic response, which involved rapid color changes across their tentacle-like appendages and high-pitched whistling sounds. The Melodites huddled together, their normally beautiful songs becoming discordant wails of fear. Even the logical Kurtani seemed to move with unusual haste, their mechanical forms clattering as they rushed to their emergency stations. Zix Thala knew about the Vex High from her diplomatic training. They were a parasitic species that consumed other civilizations, absorbing their knowledge and converting survivors into drone-like extensions of their hive mind. No one had ever successfully repelled a Vex High assault. The best anyone could hope for was to escape before they arrived. But as the panic spread through Haven's Rest, Zix Thala noticed something strange about the human response. Captain Morrison and his crew did not join the frantic rush to the evacuation shuttles. Instead, they gathered in the central hub, speaking in low, urgent tones that somehow cut through the chaos around them. "Amy, I need you to access the station's full sensor array," Morrison said, his voice carrying a tone that Zix Thala had never heard from him before. It was cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the warmth he usually showed. "Get me ship counts, weapon configurations, and estimated assault patterns." Amy Johnson's fingers moved across her control interfaces with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone who claimed to be just a communications officer. "I'm reading 47 bioships in the main formation," she reported. 17 are heavy assault class, 23 are troop carriers, and 7 appear to be command vessels. They're moving in a standard Vex High consumption pattern. Dr. Campbell had abandoned her research completely and was now accessing databases that Zix Thala did not even know existed on the station. "I need everything we have on Vex High biology," she said, her scientific enthusiasm replaced by something much more focused and dangerous. Neural pathways, reproductive cycles, toxin resistances, everything. Ryan Torres was no longer the friendly engineer who helped fix broken equipment. He moved through the maintenance areas with purposeful efficiency, pulling out tools and components. That had nothing to do with keeping the station running. When Zix Thala got closer, she realized he was building weapons. "Jake," Torres called to Morrison, "the mining lasers can be recalibrated for ship-to-ship combat, but I'll need at least 4 hours to modify the targeting systems. The industrial fabricators can produce basic explosive devices, but nothing sophisticated enough to penetrate Vex High bioarmor." Morrison nodded as if this information was exactly what he expected to hear. "Do what you can with the lasers. Amy, send a priority message to Fleet Command using the old encryption. Tell them we have a Vex High incursion at Haven's Rest and request immediate support." "Jake," Amy said, her voice carrying a weight that made Zix Thala's crystal form ring with alarm. Fleet Command is 18 hours away at best. Even if they dispatch everything immediately, we'll be on our own for the first 12 hours if any. Assault. The transformation in the humans was so complete that Zixthala wondered if she was seeing the same beings who had shared meals and stories with the station's residents. Captain Morrison studied tactical displays with the cold efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. His friendly smile was gone, replaced by an expression that reminded Zixthala of the apex predators from her homeworld. Then, we hold for 12 hours, Morrison said simply. Commander Kethmal approached the human group, his mechanical form clicking with agitation. Captain Morrison, you and your crew should join the evacuation. Your shuttle is fast enough to escape the system before the Vexai arrive. Morrison looked at the Kurtani commander with those strange human eyes that now seemed to hold depths. Zixthala had never noticed before. Commander, how many beings are currently on this station? 237, representing 12 different species, Kethmal replied. And how many can your evacuation shuttles carry? There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. Approximately 150 if we exceed safety ratings. Morrison nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. Then we're not leaving. Dr. Campbell looked up from her biological research, and Zixthala saw something in the phone. Human woman's face that made her wish she had never asked to study this species. It was not cruelty exactly, but a kind of scientific detachment that was somehow more frightening than simple malice. I found something interesting, Campbell said. Vex-high neural pathways are remarkably similar to Earth insects, specifically social insects like ants and bees. They share a collective consciousness, but it relies on specific biochemical signals. If we could disrupt those signals— You're talking about biological warfare, Commander Kethmal said, his translation device somehow conveying shock despite the mechanical nature of his voice. Campbell looked at the Kurtani commander with perfect calm. I'm talking about survival. Amy Johnson had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. I've been monitoring Vex-high communications. They're not just planning to consume the station. They're using it as a staging ground for a larger assault on the Kepler sector colonies. If we don't stop them here, 3 billion beings die. The weight of this information settled over the group like a physical presence. Zixthala realized that the humans had known this would happen, or at least had prepared for the possibility. Their research mission, their friendly integration into station life, even their choice to come to Haven's Rest in the first place, all of it suddenly seemed like careful preparation for this moment. How did you know? Zixthala found herself asking, though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer. Captain Morrison turned to look at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her crystalline form dim with instinctive fear. It was not anger or hatred, but a kind of protective calculation that was somehow more terrifying than either emotion would have been. Because this is what we do, he said simply. This is what humans have always done. We stand between the things we care about and the things that want to destroy them. Ryan Torres had been working while the others talked, and now he looked up from a device that definitely had not been part of the station's original equipment. The mining lasers will be ready in 3 hours. I've also rigged the industrial replicators to produce proximity mines, but they're crude and won't be effective against bioarmor. What about the station's defensive systems? Morrison asked. Commander Kethmal's mechanical form seemed to deflate. Haven's Rest was designed for research, not warfare. We have basic shields and 2 defensive turrets, but nothing that could stop a Vex-high assault. Morrison nodded as if this was exactly what he had expected. Then we make do with what we have. As the humans continued their preparations, Zixthala watched the other species on the station. The panic was beginning to give way to a different kind of fear as beings realized that not everyone could escape. The Melodites were singing death songs, their beautiful voices creating harmonies of despair. The Zephyrians had clustered together. In their quarters, their tentacles intertwined in gestures of mutual comfort. But something else was happening too. Some of the younger beings from various species were approaching the humans, offering to help with their preparations. A group of Cortani engineers joined Ryan Torres in his weapon modifications. Several Zephyrians volunteered to help Amy Johnson monitor communications. Even a few of the usually timid Melodites asked Dr. Campbell if they could assist with her research. The humans accepted this help with the same calm efficiency they brought to everything else. But Zixthala noticed that they gave the volunteers tasks that kept them away from the most dangerous work. They were protecting the other species, even as they prepared for ward out. As the hours passed and the Vex High fleet drew closer to Haven's Rest, Zixthala began to understand that she had never really known the humans at all. The friendly, curious beings who had shared their stories and their food were real, but they were only one face of something much more complex and terrifying. The humans were preparing to fight a battle they probably could not win against an enemy that had never been defeated, to protect beings they had known for only a few months. And they were doing it with a cold, professional competence that suggested this was not their first impossible battle. The first sign that something fundamental had changed about the humans came when Captain Morrison opened a storage compartment that Zixthala had assumed contained spare research equipment. Instead, racks of military-grade weapons emerged from hidden panels, along with tactical armor that looked nothing like the simple exploration gear the humans had worn for months. Sergeant Kyle Brooks, report to the main bay immediately. Morrison spoke into his communicator, using a tone that made Zixthala's crystalline form vibrate with recognition of pure authority. Within minutes, beings that Zixthala had never seen before began emerging from what she had thought were unused storage areas throughout the station. They wore the same human faces she had grown familiar with, but everything else about them was different. These were soldiers, moving with the precise coordination of a military unit that had trained together for years. Sergeant Brooks was a compact man with scars on his hands and a way of looking at the station's layout that turned every corridor into a potential battlefield. Behind him came 8 other humans, each carrying weapons and equipment that had definitely not been part of their research mission supplies. "Sir," Brooks said to Morrison, "all personnel are accounted for and ready for deployment. We've completed reconnaissance of the station and identified optimal defensive positions. Estimated enemy contact in 90 minutes. Dr. Campbell had transformed as completely as the others. Her research equipment now served a different purpose entirely, as she worked with materials that Zixthala was beginning to suspect were not entirely legal under galactic regulations. The friendly scientist had become something that made the word dangerous seem inadequate. I've synthesized compounds that should disrupt Vex High neural pathways," Campbell reported, holding up containers filled with substances that seemed to absorb light. "The delivery system is crude, but if we can introduce these into their command ship's atmosphere, it should cause significant confusion in their hive mind." Ryan Torres had somehow converted 3 different areas of the station into weapons manufacturing centers. The mining equipment he had been improving revealed its true purpose as military-grade defensive systems came online. When he spoke now, his voice carried the confidence of someone who had built weapons of war many times before. "Perimeter defenses are active," Torres said, checking displays that showed the station's exterior from angles Zixthala had not known were monitored. "I've mined the approach vectors and recalibrated the industrial lasers for anti-ship operations. Won't stop them, but it'll make them think twice about casual boarding." Amy Johnson was no longer the friendly communications officer who organized movie nights. She had become something that reminded Zixthala of the strategic coordinators her own people used during territorial disputes. except with a coldness that suggested experience with actual combat rather than just theoretical planning. "I've penetrated their communication network," Johnson reported, her fingers dancing across interfaces that definitely exceeded the technical capabilities of a research station. "Their assault pattern indicates they plan to take the station intact. For conversion purposes, they're not expecting significant resistance." The other aliens on Haven's Rest watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and terror. Commander Kethmal approached Morrison, with obvious confusion radiating from his mechanical form. "Captain Morrison, I must ask directly, what exactly is your mission here?" Morrison paused in his review of tactical displays and looked at the Cortani commander with an expression that somehow managed to be both apologetic and completely unyielding. "Our primary mission was exactly what we told you, cultural exchange and research," Morrison said. "But humans learned long ago that exploration and defense are often the same thing. Every human ship carries military capabilities. Every human. Crew includes combat personnel, and every human mission includes contingency plans for exactly this kind of situation." "You lied to us," whispered Veltar, the Zephyrian whose tentacles had shifted to the deep purple that indicated profound distress. Dr. Campbell looked up from her chemical work, and Zixthala saw something in her expression that was more frightening than anger would have been. It was patience, the kind of patience a teacher might show to a child who had asked a particularly naive question. "We never lied," Campbell said quietly. "We are researchers. We do want cultural exchange. We genuinely care about the beings on this station. But we're also the product of a world where caring about something means being prepared to fight for it." The Vex-High fleet had moved into weapons range, and the station's sensors revealed details that made even the humans pause. The bioships were larger than expected, and their formation suggested a level of tactical sophistication that went beyond simple predatory instinct. "They've learned," Morrison said, studying the enemy formation with obvious concern. "Someone's been teaching them strategy." Sergeant Brooks and his team had positioned themselves throughout the station with an efficiency that turned Haven's Rest into a fortress in less than an hour. They moved like they had planned for this exact scenario, which Zixthala was beginning to suspect they actually had. "Contact in 30 minutes, Rooks reported. "All defensive positions are manned, all non-combatants are in secured areas, all weapons are hot and ready." The first Vex-High boarding pod struck the station's outer hull with impacts that shook the entire structure. Zixthala watched through internal monitors as the parasitic beings began cutting through the hull with biotools that dissolved metal like acid dot. Then she saw how humans fought. The first Vex-High to breach the hull found themselves in a corridor that had been transformed into a killing zone. Ryan Torres had arranged the lighting to create blind spots and shadows, while Amy Johnson fed false information to their navigation systems through the station's internal network. When the creatures advanced, they walked into crossfires that had been planned with mathematical precision. But it was not just the tactical superiority that made Zixthala's crystalline form dim with instinctive fear. It was the way the humans fought. They did not simply defend. They hunted. Sergeant Brooks and his team moved through the station like apex predators who had found prey that had made the mistake of entering their territory. Dr. Campbell's biological weapons proved devastatingly effective. The Vex-High relied on chemical communication for coordination, and her compounds turned their own nervous systems against them. Creatures that had consumed entire civilizations found themselves confused and disoriented, easy targets for human weapons. Amy Johnson had done something to the Vex-High command network that was turning their own coordination systems into weapons against them. False orders spread through their ranks, causing units to attack each other or abandon strategic positions at critical moments. "Their command ship is trying to establish direct control," Johnson reported, her voice calm despite the battle raging. around them. I'm feeding them targeting data that puts their own troops in the line of fire. Ryan Torres had turned the station's own systems into weapons that the Vex High could not understand or counter. Maintenance robots became suicide bombers. Environmental systems became poison gas dispensers. And even the artificial gravity became a weapon that could pin enemies to walls or crush them against the ceiling. The humans coordinated their defense with a precision that made Zix Thela understand why no species in Galactic history had ever successfully conquered Earth. They fought not just as individuals, but as a single organism with multiple deadly appendages, each part supporting the others in ways that maximized damage to their enemies. But perhaps most terrifying was their complete calm in the face of an enemy that had never been defeated. When Vex High bioweapons began eating through their defensive positions, the humans simply fell back to new positions that had already been prepared. When enemy reinforcements arrived, human counterattacks struck at exactly the moments when they would cause maximum disruption. Phase 2 of their assault is beginning, Morrison announced as new readings appeared on the tactical displays. They're committing their heavy bioships to direct assault on the station's core. Zix Thela expected this news to cause despair among the defenders, but instead she saw something that made her understand why the rest of the galaxy should be very careful about making enemies of humans. Morrison smiled, and it was not the friendly expression she had grown accustomed to. It was the smile of a predator whose prey had just made exactly the mistake he had been waiting for. All teams implement Protocol 7, Morrison said into his communicator. Zix Thela did not know what Protocol 7 was, but she was beginning to suspect that she did not want to find out. The humans had been planning for this battle long before the Vex High had even been detected, and every move the enemy made seemed to play into strategies that had been prepared in advance. The friendly researchers who had shared stories and meals with the station's residents were still there, but they had become something else as well. They had become the thing that stood between the Vex High swarm and everything the humans had decided to protect, and Zix Thela was beginning to understand that this was a very dangerous place for the Vex High to be. Protocol 7 turned out to be something that made Zix Thela understand why the humans had seemed so confident about facing an enemy that had never been defeated. As the Vex High heavy bioships moved into position to assault the station's core, Ryan Torres activated systems that Zix Thela was certain had not existed when she first arrived at Haven's Rest. Hidden weapon emplacements emerged from what had appeared to be decorative panels throughout the station's exterior. Mining lasers that Torres had modified revealed themselves to be military-grade ship killers that had been disguised as industrial equipment. Most shocking of all, the station's entire outer ring detached and began moving independently, revealing that Haven's Rest had been converted into a mobile weapons platform. "Target the command bioships first," Morrison ordered, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had planned for exactly this scenario. "Amy, I need you to maintain communication disruption while Lisa deploys the neural toxins. Kyle, prepare your teams for boarding operations." Boarding operations? The humans were not just planning to defend against the Vex High. They were planning to attack them. Dr. Campbell had completed something that she called a neural cascade weapon, which sounded scientific until Zix Thela saw what it actually did. When the first batch of her biological agents was deployed against the nearest Vex High bioship, the entire vessel began moving erratically as its crew lost coordination with their hive mind. "The compounds are working better than expected," Campbell reported, watching readouts that showed the bioship's internal systems failing. "The Vex High nervous system is more vulnerable to targeted disruption than their reputation suggested. I can synthesize enough material to affect their entire fleet." Amy Johnson had done something to the Vex High communication network that was turning their coordination into chaos. Commands meant for one ship were being received by others. Tactical updates were being scrambled, and false targeting data was causing their weapons to fire on their own forces. "I've gained full access to their battle management systems," Johnson sighed, her fingers moving across her controls with deadly precision. "They're using biological neural networks for fleet coordination, and I can feed those networks whatever information I want them to have." But it was Sergeant Brooks and his team who showed Zix Thala the true depth of human military capability. When Morrison gave the order for boarding operations, the soldiers did not simply prepare to repel enemy boarders. They prepared to assault the Vex-High ships directly. "Sir," Brooks reported, "we have 3 teams ready for ship-to-ship assault. Lieutenant Kelly Martinez will lead Team Alpha against their primary command vessel. Corporal Danny Clark will take Team Beta against their troop carriers, and I'll lead Team Gamma against their heavy assault ships." The idea of using boarding pods to attack Vex-High bioships was beyond anything that other galactic species had ever attempted. The parasitic aliens were supposed to be unbeatable in close combat, their biotechnology superior to any mechanical weapons. But the humans were preparing to fight them on their own ships, in their own environment. "Remember your training," Morrison told the assault teams as they prepared to launch. "Vex-High bioships are living organisms. They feel pain, they can be shocked, and they have vulnerable points that conventional ships don't. Use that against them." Lieutenant Martinez was a small woman with blonde hair and scars on her arms that spoke of previous battles. She checked her weapons with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before, many times. Her team moved with the same deadly coordination, each member knowing exactly what their role would be once they reached the enemy ships. "Team Alpha is ready for deployment," Martinez reported. "We'll target the command ship's neural center and attempt to sever their fleet coordination capabilities." Corporal Clark was the youngest member of the assault teams, but he moved with a confidence that made his age irrelevant. His team carried specialized equipment that Zix Thala could not identify, though its purpose became clear when Clark began explaining their mission. "Team Beta will focus on the troop carriers," Clark said. "Our objective is to prevent reinforcement of their boarding parties and, if possible, to capture specimens for Dr. Campbell's research." Capture specimens. The humans were planning to take Vex-High prisoners for study, something that no other species had ever managed to do. The assault began with a precision that made Zix Thala understand why humans had become the dominant species on a world filled with dangerous predators. The modified station weapons fired in coordinated patterns that overwhelmed the Vex-High defenses, while Campbell's biological weapons created confusion and panic throughout their fleet. But it was the boarding operations that revealed the true nature of human warfare. The assault teams launched from hidden bays using pods that had been disguised as escape shuttles, reaching the Vex-High bioships before the enemy could react to their presence. What happened next was something that Zix Thala knew would haunt her for the rest of her existence. The humans did not simply fight the Vex-High. They outmatched them in every aspect of combat that mattered. They were faster, more adaptable, and more ruthlessly efficient than beings who had conquered entire star systems. Lieutenant Martinez and Team Alpha reached the command bioship's neural center and began systematic destruction of the organic computers that controlled the Vex-High fleet. But they did not simply destroy the systems. They studied them first, learning how they worked before deciding how best to disable them. "Command ship neural network is more sophisticated than expected," Martinez reported, her voice calm despite a battle raging around her. "I'm downloading their tactical databases before we shut them down. This information could be valuable for future encounters." Team Beta's assault on the troop carriers was even more devastating. Corporal Clark and his soldiers moved through the bioships like a plague, systematically eliminating resistance while capturing key personnel for interrogation. The Vex-High, who had never faced beings capable of matching their physical capabilities, found themselves outfought in their own environment. We've secured 17 specimens and disrupted 3 troop carriers, Clark reported. The enemy's close combat capabilities are less impressive than their reputation suggested. Sergeant Brooks led Team Gamma in an assault that was less about tactics and more about pure destructive capability. His team carried weapons that were designed to kill bioships from the inside, and they used them with devastating effectiveness. Heavy assault ships are neutralized, Brooks reported. I'm reading complete system failures across all primary targets. But perhaps most terrifying was Dr. Campbell's role in the battle. She had not joined the boarding parties, but her biological weapons were turning the Vex-High fleet into a collection of confused, disoriented vessels whose crews could no longer coordinate their actions. Neural cascade is spreading through their entire fleet, Campbell announced, watching displays that showed the bioships beginning to move erratically. Their hive mind is collapsing. Individual vessels are losing contact with fleet coordination. Amy Johnson had achieved something that military theorists had considered impossible. She had gained complete control of an enemy fleet's communication systems while they were actively engaged in combat. I now have administrative access to their battle management network, Johnson reported. I can issue orders directly to individual bioships, and their crews will follow them without question. The battle that was supposed to result in the consumption of Haven's Rest had instead become a systematic destruction of a Vex-High fleet by a handful of humans using tactics that no other species had ever imagined, much less attempted. Morrison coordinated the entire operation with a calm that made Zixthala understand that this was not unusual for humans. They had fought battles like this before, against enemies that other species considered unbeatable, and they had won because they approached warfare with the same methodical efficiency they brought to everything else. All teams prepare for Phase 3, Morrison announced as the tactical displays showed the Vex-High fleet beginning to break apart under the coordinated assault. Phase 3 turned out to be something that made Zixthala realize she had fundamentally misunderstood what humans were capable of. As the enemy bioships lost coordination and began to retreat, the humans did not simply let them go. They pursued. Amy, I need targeting solutions for their escape vectors, Morrison said. Lisa, prepare your most potent compounds for long-range deployment. Ryan, bring the station's heavy weapons online for pursuit fire. The idea of pursuing a retreating Vex-High fleet was beyond anything other species had ever attempted. The standard Galactic response to a Vex-High withdrawal was gratitude and immediate evacuation of the area. But the humans were treating the retreat as an opportunity for further attack. Sir, Lieutenant Martinez reported from the captured command ship, I've accessed their navigation databases. This fleet was part of a larger force preparing to assault the Kepler sector colonies. The main swarm is holding position 3 systems away. Morrison's response to this information was not fear or concern, but something that looked remarkably like anticipation. The transformation that occurred in the hours after the battle was perhaps more unsettling than the violence that had preceded it. As the last Vex-High bioship disappeared into hyperspace, carrying news of their defeat back to the main swarm, the humans underwent another complete change in behavior that left Zixthala struggling to understand what she had witnessed. Captain Morrison, who had coordinated the systematic destruction of an enemy fleet with cold efficiency, now knelt beside a wounded Nelodite child, singing the same human lullabies that had charmed the station's residents during their first cultural exchange events. His hands, which had directed weapons that could kill bioships, now moved with infinite gentleness as he helped medical personnel treat injuries. Dr. Campbell, who had created biological weapons capable of disrupting an entire Vex-High hive mind, was working tirelessly to treat wounded aliens using medical techniques that seemed to combine the best of human and galactic knowledge. She moved from patient to patient with the same intense focus she had brought to warfare, but now that focus was dedicated to healing rather than harm. The neural cascade compounds I developed for the Vex-High can be modified to accelerate healing in most carbon-based species. Campbell explained as she worked on a Zephyrian whose tentacles had been damaged during the evacuation. The same biochemical pathways that made them vulnerable can be used to enhance recovery in our allies. Ryan Torres had already begun repairs on the station, but his modifications went far beyond simple restoration. Every system he touched became more efficient, more comfortable, more suited to the needs of the multi-species community that called Haven's Rest home. The weapons emplacements that had savaged the Vex-High fleet were being converted into improved sensor arrays and communication systems. The defensive modifications will remain in place, Torres said as he worked, but they'll be hidden even better than before. Anyone who visits this station will see exactly what we want them to see: a peaceful research facility dedicated to interspecies cooperation. Amy Johnson was coordinating relief efforts with the same precision she had used to disrupt enemy communications. She had somehow arranged for medical supplies, food, and temporary housing to arrive from sources throughout the sector, creating a support network that seemed to appear from nowhere. "I've contacted families of all the wounded," Johnson reported. "Transport is being arranged for anyone who wants to return home, and counseling services are available for those who want to remain. No one will be forced to stay anywhere they don't feel safe." But it was the behavior of the assault teams that most clearly demonstrated the human capacity for controlled transformation. Sergeant Brooks and his soldiers, who had fought with deadly efficiency through enemy bioships, were now helping with evacuation procedures and debris cleanup. They moved with the same military precision, but now it was directed toward protecting and assisting rather than killing. Lieutenant Martinez, who had led the assault on the Vex-High command ship, was working with Commander Kethmal to improve the station's emergency protocols. Her recommendations were based on hard-won experience with both defense and evacuation procedures. "We can modify the station's layout to provide better protection for non-combatants while maintaining operational efficiency," Martinez explained. "The goal is to make sure that if something like this happens again, everyone has a better chance of survival." The casual way she spoke about future attacks made Zix Thala realize that the humans expected this kind of violence to be a regular part of life in space. They were not preparing for the possibility of another attack. They were preparing for the certainty of one dot as the immediate crisis passed and normal routines began to resume. Zix Thala found herself struggling to reconcile the different versions of humanity she had witnessed. The friendly researchers who had shared meals and stories were the same beings who had systematically destroyed a Vex-High fleet. The gentle caregivers tending to wounded aliens were the same people who had created biological weapons of terrifying efficiency. "You're having trouble understanding what you've seen," Captain Morrison said, approaching Zix Thala as she stood in the observation deck where this entire experience had begun. His voice carried the same warm tone she remembered from their first meeting, but now she could hear the depths beneath it. "I thought I knew what humans were," Zix Thala admitted. "I thought you were a peaceful species, perhaps naive but well-intentioned. I was wrong about everything." Morrison looked out at the debris field where the Vex-High fleet had been destroyed, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his words carried a weight that made Zix Thala understand that she was hearing something important about human nature. "You weren't wrong," Morrison said. "We are peaceful. We do prefer cooperation to conflict. We genuinely care about other species and want to build relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. But we're also the product of a world that taught us that caring about something means being prepared to fight for it." He turned to face her, and Zix Thala saw something in his eyes that she was beginning to recognize as quintessentially human: the ability to hold contradictory truths simultaneously without being destroyed by them. "Earth was not a kind world," Morrison continued. We evolved surrounded by predators, competing for resources, facing environmental disasters that could wipe out entire populations. We learned that survival required both cooperation and the willingness to use violence when cooperation failed. Dr. Campbell joined them at the observation window, her medical work temporarily completed. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had spent a difficult day doing necessary work. "The galaxy has been fortunate," Campbell said. "Most species evolved on worlds that were relatively stable and safe. They developed advanced civilizations without needing to master the arts of war. But that left them vulnerable to species like the Vex High, who treat violence as a tool like any other." "So you hide your true nature," Zixthala said, though she was no longer sure that accusation was entirely fair. "We don't hide anything," Amy Johnson said, appearing with a data tablet that showed casualty reports and recovery statistics. "We simply don't lead with our capacity for violence because we prefer not to use it. But when something threatens what we care about, we respond with everything we have." The truth of this statement was evident in the aftermath of the battle. The humans had revealed capabilities that transformed them from apparently harmless researchers into the most effective military force Zixthala had ever seen. But they had done so only when faced with an enemy that threatened innocent lives. "The question now," Morrison said, "is what the galaxy does with the knowledge of what humans are capable of. We hope it will lead to better cooperation and mutual defense. But we understand that some species might see us as a threat rather than as allies." Commander Kethmo approached the group, his mechanical form moving with obvious purpose. When he spoke, his translated voice carried a formal tone that suggested an official pronouncement. "Captain Morrison, I have completed my report to the Galactic Council regarding the events at Haven's Rest," the Kurtani commander said. "I have recommended that humanity be granted full membership status immediately, with a request for expanded cooperation in defense matters." "And if the Council sees us as too dangerous for membership?" Morrison asked. Kathmal's response was immediate and definitive. "Then the Council will be making a grave error in judgment. Any species capable of what I witnessed today, but choosing to use that capability only in defense of others, is exactly the kind of member the galactic community needs." As the days passed and Haven's Rest returned to something resembling normal operations, Zixthala worked on her final report to the more ethereal confluence. She struggled with how to describe what she had learned about humanity, how to convey the complex truth of a species that could switch between profound gentleness and devastating violence depending on what the situation required. In the end, she wrote, "Humans are not what they appear to be, but they are exactly what they claim to be. They are explorers and researchers who genuinely want to learn about other species and share knowledge. They are also warriors capable of defeating enemies that no other species has successfully resisted. Most importantly, they are beings who have consciously chosen to use their capacity for violence only in defense of others. Recommendation: accept humanity's application for Galactic Council membership immediately, not because we need their protection, though we clearly do, but because they represent the kind of species we want to become. They have faced the choice between strength and kindness and found a way to embody both. Personal note: I have learned that the most dangerous beings in the galaxy are not those who are inherently violent, but those who choose when to be violent and when to be gentle. Humans have mastered this choice in ways that make them both the most terrifying and the most trustworthy species I have ever encountered." The final entry in her report was written as she watched Captain Morrison teaching a group of young Melodites how to play a human game called chess, his patience infinite as he explained strategy and tactics to beings who had never needed to think about conflict.